That's it. Through 21. Okay, 96. Yeah. So that text is talking about a lot along with what we're studying today, about the sins of the world. I'm going to have a mission story here. I think it's very important that we keep mission focused in front of us. I like AWR because it reaches a lot of people that can't be reached otherwise. I was sitting on a riverbank enjoying a snack with a missionary friend, Robert, from the beautiful Mauritius Island nation. We were in the Ayatiri forest in central Congo, about 65 miles from the nearest semblance of civilization, a village where we had built a rudimentary airstrip. This was 35 years ago, and we were completely isolated. The only communication that reached us from the outside world was a government radio broadcast by shortwave and medium wave radio. We had been visiting remote villages to teach them about Jesus, using one of the few things we had available back then, picture rolls. How many of you remember? When I was in Thailand back in 1981, after church, we would go up in the Hmong and the Yao and up in the hill tribe villages and take the nurse, public health nurse, and the pastor, myself, and a few church members. We'd drive up into the hill village. As soon as we'd come into a village, all the kids would just swarm out. They'd go underneath one of the houses, and all the houses were up on stilts. And Juana, the nurse, she would go and visit different people, and then we would do picture scrolls and sing songs and to all the kids. We'd do that every Sabbath. It was really neat. I enjoyed that. But anyways, he was talking about here that they did the picture scrolls, and how many people enjoyed them. They'd never seen anything like it. Now on our way back to the village where the plane would pick us up, we stopped to eat a snack we'd brought with us. There was no telling when the plane would return. Sometimes we'd wait 2, 3, or even more days as we had no way of communicating. As we ate and talked, I noticed a large nest of yellow jackets with a hole in it. Suddenly, I was stung by a yellow jacket, then another and another and another. I ran in one direction, Robert ran the other, all the while crying out for help from the few African friends who had accompanied us. But I heard them yell back as they hid in the forest, "You know, come here." I finally realized they had run into the jungle to hide from the wasps, which I had no idea you could do. I immediately did the same and found I had been stung 33 times, and Robert had 20 stings. That night we were extremely sick. I felt like our skin was on fire, but thankfully, after a few more uncomfortable days, we recovered. God protected us in incredible ways during those years of service, and the rewards were enormous. I still remember one 86-year-old man who said to us during this particular trip, "I have never heard this story you are telling us about Jesus. Can you send us a teacher?" At the time, I had no solution and thought, how would it ever be possible to reach such a remote village? And for many years, it wasn't. But now, Adventist World Radio is in the Congo thanks to your support and prayers. As I write this letter, we have 7 new active stations across the country and 2 more going up right now. This was written in February of this year. Let me share just a brief report and a thrilling story of what has been happening this past year. Last year was now not a shutdown for AWR, as God provided us with even more opportunities. As I often say to Kathy, what a time to be alive. Just like in most countries this past year, public gatherings were restricted in the DRC, which is Democratic Republic of Congo, which included evangelistic meetings. In the capital city of Kinshasa, households were allowed a maximum of 7 visitors at one time. The West Congo Union Mission decided to use Adventist World Radio to invite listeners to join households nearest to them for radio Bible studies. They use AWR 360 broadcasts as platforms for home evangelism. At the end of each broadcast, the home group leaders would discuss the topic presented with their guests. During the first part of the year, all the radio broadcasts were aired with a very weak temporary transmitter, and it wasn't long before it failed. AWR replaced it so the broadcast could continue during a time when many listeners were desperately looking for hope. When the radio series was over, hundreds of people were baptized throughout Kinshasa, and now a new and fully equipped FM station is currently under construction. It's normally difficult to find reputable radio tower construction companies in the DRC. But another miracle occurred as God helped us find a tower construction specialist who is now a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Guana Project. From this past October through December, the North Guana Union Mission aired an evangelistic series on 12 FM stations in the 12 conferences of the Union, covering all of northern Guana. The broadcasts were also relayed in hundreds of local markets through gigantic loudspeaker systems. That's amazing. So they put up speakers all over the markets. And if you've ever been in third world countries, they do that. They drive up and down the road with big speakers and announce everything. It's not, they didn't have radio, at least when I was there. And if there was anything going on, a movie or whatever, I don't know, I couldn't understand it because it was all in their native language. But, that's the way they broadcasted, was drive up and down the road with a little Datsun or Toyota pickup with loudspeakers outside. The series was so popular that even the mayor of one of the cities was a faithful listener. And every program featured a question of the week, which became an event in many households. The first few people to call into the station and respond correctly were given a prize delivered personally to each winner. You can imagine how thrilled they were to connect with someone from the program they loved so much. By the end of the series, more than 2,000 people had been baptized. Now the union plans to hold AWR evangelistic meetings every quarter. That's a good way to do it. In Rwanda, our AWR FM station in Kigali, Rwanda, is unlike any other. The people of Rwanda have adopted as the central point of reconciliation for the whole country, even today, 27 years after the genocide. Listeners call the station every Tuesday to confess and ask for forgiveness from those whom may have lost family members due to their actions. As a result, our station has become a symbol of hope. As you know, that there was Adventists involved, and they were fighting against each other's tribe in the genocide, and it was pretty gruesome. During this past year, we have been steadily working on erecting 3 new FM towers to cover all of Rwanda, which is known for being the country of 1,000 hills. In fact, it's so hilly that they say it's hard to find a place flat enough to play a soccer game. This makes it difficult for radio waves to cover the whole country with a strong signal. But the 3 towers will do just that. 2 towers were completed in 2020 and will begin construction on the 3rd in February. There are 7 AWR FM stations in Uganda. Oh, that was it for Rwanda. This is about Uganda. For existing stations, and 3 on the verge of completion. During the first wave of the pandemic from April to June of last year, more than 5,000 people were baptized as a result of AWR's FM broadcasts in Uganda. So 5,000 in Uganda were baptized just this last year between April and June. That was 2020. Madagascar. We have just received a report that more than 70 churches have been established in Madagascar. 70 churches established, while we see churches in North America decreasing. As a direct result of AWR's radio broadcast by shortwave and FM stations, there are 24 AWR stations operating throughout the country, covering Madagascar with the gospel message. What we hear over and over again is that people find our stations by accident as they're searching for other stations. The truth impacts them and they become loyal listeners. And after following our broadcast for a time, they're connected with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We know this is God's Spirit at work. There's one story. The witch, the hollow, cow means cow thief. Alfred was a feared cow thief in a dangerous part of Madagascar called the Red Zone, known as the Hollow. A cow thief must also be a witch. So he was a witch and a cow thief. And Alfred was a powerful one. Witchcraft is supposed to protect cow thieves from anything metal, including guns and knives, and allows them to kill their enemies. Alfred had a neighbor named Michael, a Seventh-day Adventist and a faithful Adventist World Radio listener. Alfred hated Michael's religion. And one day, about 3 years ago, he decided to kill Mikel and his family with witchcraft. He had killed many people like this before and saw no problem in doing it again. But to his great surprise, nothing happened. Every day he watched Mikel and his family go about their business as usual. None of them died. They didn't even get sick. This greatly disturbed him. He thought, why can't I kill them when I've killed so many? His frustration grew, and he decided he needed to know more about Mikel's religion. He began to listen carefully whenever Mikel talked about the Bible. Mikel was well aware that Alfred had tried to kill him and his family, but that didn't change his attitude toward him. He continued loving. He began coming over to Mikel's house every day to listen to AWR with Mikel and his family. Then before he realized what was happening, Alfred was attending a Bible study class. Despite his interest, he did his best to avoid meeting the Adventist pastor, but he did decide to begin keeping the Sabbath. When AWR shared several God pods in his village, Alfred managed to get one and listen to it constantly. There was one question that kept nagging at him, and he was searching for the answer. Why is my power so weak against Mikel's God? Slowly, the truth began to dawn on him. He had been wrong in his whole life, both in his beliefs and his actions. When he finally understood, he felt so ashamed. Then the Southwestern AWR God Pod listening group, and not only was Alfred among them, but he was the first one to arrive on opening night. As God's Spirit worked on his heart, Alfred put away all practices of witchcraft. When the time to respond to the call to give his heart and his life to Jesus, he responded without hesitation. Alfred was baptized at the end of 2020 and is now the oldest and most faithful member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I can't pronounce the name. It's a town in Madagascar. His family followed him, and all are now Seventh-day Adventists. Powerful work going in Africa. I just heard this morning, Mark Wong told me that on presenting and people present for, different meetings and the virtual meetings and everything. North American Vision was only 15% presented. Africa was 70%. So, do we have a problem here in North America? I think we do. We think we are rich and in need of nothing. Lukewarm. We got to get out of our lukewarm state. Anyways. Work. And, I don't know, let me get this. See here. We're studying this quarter called The Promise, God's Everlasting Covenant. And I know it's mentioned that it's really one covenant, but there is some differences in some of the covenants. Like the covenant we're studying today. It's a covenant that he gave with us with the bow in the sky. But I thought was really interesting in the lesson today, I don't know if you like the illustration like I did, but illustration of bacteria and sin. And I know Jim knows far more than I do about bacteria probably, than since he's really into science. But I thought it was just really how the illustration of bacteria compared to sin. Bacteria are plant organisms too small to see without a microscope, even after being magnified 1,000 times. So if you magnify bacteria 1,000 times, a single common round bacteria appears no larger than a pencil point. That's pretty amazing. 1,000 times you magnify it, and it's still so small it's hard to see. Given formidable conditions for growth, sufficient warmth, moisture, and food, bacteria multiply at an extremely rapid rate. For example, some bacteria reproduce by simple fission. A mature cell simply splits into two daughter cells. When fission takes place every hour, one bacteria can produce more than 16 million new bacteria in 24 hours. Wow. At the end of 48 hours, hundreds of billions of bacteria will have appeared. The microscope phenomenon is the natural world, in the natural world, illustrates the rapid growth of evil after the fall. I thought it was interesting, the parallel in looking at that. And you know, I know when I was in science class in school, we used to do petri dishes, and they'd say, okay, take a petri dish and put it in the bathroom, put it on the urinal, or put it on the back of the toilet, and then put something over here, and we'd watch the different growth of I guess it was bacteria that would get in there. You know, it was a science experiment that was a pretty simple experiment, it was a good illustration to see how it just, you know, you put something in and all of a sudden it just grows. It's pretty amazing. But, you know, sin, you know, we look at the growth of sin, and you see it was over, you know, I mean, Methuselah passed away, he was alive when Noah was there, but Methuselah was the oldest living person, and it wasn't far removed from Adam. So you're talking a little over 1,000 years from the time fall of in the garden, right? And even right immediately, and we look at the jealousy that happened between Cain and Abel. And Cain was jealous, and immediately first death of a human being, and it just how it just, you know, magnified. And I look at Adam and Eve, and yeah, it was disobedient to what God said, and how important it is for us to obey God, because they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden just because she took a fruit. She didn't kill anybody. She didn't go out and steal something, or, you know, of the commandment, but she in disobedience, she disobeyed God. And I'm going to read some things here. 1 John 3:8 says, "He who sins is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning." So that's pretty harsh words right there. I mean, it's powerful words. That if you sin, you're of the devil. Just point blank. You know, some people say, you know, they grew up thinking, oh, there's a white lie in this. No, a lie's a lie, right? You know, and they kind of grade sins, but no, sin is sin. It says, for this purpose the Son of God was manifested. That's powerful, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Right? That's a awesome verse. Christ was engaged in his warfare in Noah's day. It was his voice that spoke to the inhabitants of the old world in messages of warning, reproof, and invitation. He gave the people a probation of 120 years. People say the God of the Old Testament is different than the God of the New Testament. No, it's the same one. His mercy and his grace. He gave them 120 years to repent. That's, you know, maybe they didn't compare that very long. I don't know, because a lot of people were living up, you know, close to 1,000 years. But 120 years, that's still, I wasn't saying, hey, I'm going to give you 24 hours. A lot of times we want to give people 24, or, you know, I know on construction contracts we give people 24 to 72 hours to make a decision on something, you know. After 72 hours, it's like, forget it, you know. And we don't have that much grace. But God gave 120 years in which they might have repented, but they chose the deceptions of Satan and perished in the waters of the flood. We talked last week a little bit about their inventions and how they perished, but Ellen White brings out some things. She says, there perished in the flood greater inventions of art and human skill than the world knows of today. The arts destroyed were more than the boasted arts of today. How did man gain his knowledge of how to devise? From the Lord, by studying the formation and habits of different animals. If men could have only known how many arts have been lost to our world, they would not talk so fluently of the dark ages. Could they have seen how God once worked through his human subjects, they would speak with less confidence of the arts of the antediluvian world. More was lost in the flood in many years than men today know. Looking upon the world, God saw that the intellect he had given men was perverted, that the imagination of his heart was evil, and that continually. God had given these men knowledge. True knowledge has decreased with every successive generation. God is infinite, and the first people upon the earth received their instructions from that infinite God who created the world. Those who received their knowledge direct from infinite wisdom were not deficient in knowledge. There are many inventions and improvements and labor-saving machines now that the ancients did not have. They did not need them. So she points out that the things that we have now today are labor-saving. They didn't need them back then, but we need them now. The greater the length of time the earth has lain under the curse, the more difficult has it been for man to cultivate it and make it productive. As the soul has become more barren and double labor has had to be expended upon it, God has raised up men with inventive faculties to construct implements to lighten labor on the land growing under the curse. But God has not been in all man's inventions. Satan has controlled the minds of men to a great extent and has hurried men to new inventions, which has led them to forget God. In strength of intellect, men who now live can bear no comparison to the ancients. There have been more ancient arts lost than the present generation now possesses. For skill and art, those living in the degenerate age will not compare with the knowledge possessed by strong men who lived near 1,000 years. So we have degenerated. Our muscle mass, our height, our everything is degenerated. So we've had to depend upon inventions of things to help us ease. Back then, they didn't have to worry. They were tall, they were strong, and so they were able to do the work. But men before the flood lived many hundreds of years, and when 100 years old, they were considered but youths. Those long-lived men had strong, sound minds and sound bodies. Their mental and physical strength was so great that the present feeble generation can bear no comparison to them. Those ancients had nearly 1,000 years in which to acquire knowledge. They came upon the stage of action from the ages of 60 to 100 years, about the time those who now live the longest have acted their part in their little short lifetime and have passed off the stage. Those who are deceived and flattered on in the delusion that the present is an age of real progress and that the human race has been in ages past progressing in true knowledge are under the influence of the father of lies, whose work has ever been to turn the truth of God into a lie. We have the history of the antediluvians and of the cities of the plain, whose course of conduct degenerated from lightness and frivolity to debasing sins that called down the wrath of God and a most dreadful destruction in order to rid the earth of the curse of their contaminating influence. Inclination and passion bore sway over reason. Self was their God, and the knowledge of the Most High was nearly obliterated through the selfish indulgence of corrupt passions. As I read this, think about today, because God said it will be as in the days of Noah. Think about the time we live in now. And as I read further, this here, their appetite. The inhabitants of the Noachian world were destroyed because they were corrupted through the indulgence of perverted appetite. Do you see that today? Perverted appetite. You see, there are so many cooking shows on. I mean, I think they have there's a channel, whole channels on just cooking, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Was there a comment? Julie had one.
That appetite can be applied to anything that people desire to do, whether it's food, sexual, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If they apply it against God and not for God, then it's a perverse appetite.
Right. Yeah, so perverted appetite, as mentioned of anything, they worship self-indulgence, eating, drinking, merrymaking, and resorted to acts of violence and crime, and their desires and passions were interfered with. So you think about today, it's like, I could be any choice I want sexually, or that's a mind thought these days. Against all government and power. I mean, they don't acknowledge the police force. There's just so much. Jim.
Some of you know that we have these cottages that we use for Airbnb when we're not doing sessions. And so we clean up after people. I'm amazed. You and I, all of us in this room, we just don't get it because of the way we've chosen to live. But here's a couple that've been there for just 2 nights. And there's a bag of quart wine bottles. I can't imagine it. How people live these days, and it's just designed by the devil to make people uninterested in spiritual things.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sad day. Of course,
Yeah, there's a reason they called, alcohol, they call it spirits, right?
Yeah.
And, when I was delving in that world for a while, you go into a club and everything looked good because everything was dark, right? And you stay there until 2 o'clock in the morning when they flip on the lights and the floor is just grungy and nasty and everybody red eyes and everybody just looks terrible, And Satan is darkness, right? Everything looks good on the surface in the dark, right? But then when the true stuff comes out, you really see what it's really all about, and it's not a place to be. No need.
Well, the paragraph you read put me in mind of some advertisements that I saw a couple of years ago. It was actually advertising a drugstore and how the service was really good there. But the tagline was, "It's all about me. It's all about me." And I'm like, what a selfish generation. And then we have selfies. People, you can buy a stick that'll extend out several feet so you can take a picture of yourself wherever you are. I've never understood that concept. I don't want to be in front of a camera. I'd just as soon be behind one. Thank you very much. But we are in the me generation. It's just, it's incredible to me that we are so self-focused. Even though we think, we come to church and we do all these good things, how much of what we do is really all about me?
Yeah, and that's the way, and Bonnie had a comment, that's the way it was back there. It says self-indulgence. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Well, a few years back, I used to ride with the ambulance as an EMT. And I'll tell you that you go into people's houses, and I wouldn't I wouldn't have my dog living there. I wouldn't have an animal living there. And you bring them back out and put them in the ambulance, and you think, I have no doubt why this person is sick. Because it's not just, the things that they take, it's the things that they do to themselves and the way they live. And it is beyond description, some of the places that I've seen. It's just unimaginable. And I believe that's all due to sin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I've heard a statement, cleanliness is near to godliness. I don't know if that's in the Bible, but I've heard that statement, and I believe it is true.
Yeah, I mean, I have been in those places too, because I go to quite a few medical calls, being on the fire department, and yeah, it's pretty eye-opening, the places you go to, and usually they have a lot of animals, and the animals have urinated and everything in the house, and the place smells like animals and trash everywhere, and it just tears at your heart to see this type of stuff of people living this way. And if they would know God, that God is an orderly God, a clean God. And if you study nature, look at nature. I mean, the birds build new houses every year. They take out the trash. They take out the garbage. If you watch the male and female bird and just watch them, I mean, the male bird will just tend to the nest. And, you look at all nature. I don't know of nature that lives in mess or pigs. But yeah, but there are scavengers that God created after death, after sin. He created these scavengers to clean up the pollution, because before sin there wasn't the pollution. So, Bonnie had another comment as you're taking the mic over. But it says the land was filled with violence. Think of this, and think of now. Think of the antediluvian. Had war, crime, murder was the order of the day. Just so will it be before Christ's second coming. We see that now.
Sorry, Julie, I just have to make one comment about the pigs. People I have known, live with pigs in their house, and they're more cleanly than humans. It's where you allow them to live that they just, they just abide by it. But if you give them a clean environment, they are clean. And they can be potty trained, too.
No, thank you.
Yeah, right. But you think of today's world, where we live in, and how close we are to Jesus coming. And God, he looked down upon the antediluvians, and it said before the destruction of the world by flood, there were talented men who possessed skill and knowledge, but they became corrupt in their imagination because they left God out of their plans and counsels. So if we leave God out of our plans, if it's all up to us and our own understanding, it will be destruction to us, right? Second talks about some of the, let me see here if I do that right. Said there was so much gold and silver, abundance of gold and silver and minerals, that they built extravagant houses for themselves. And they built vineyards, and the wood was just fabulous back. I mean, Ellen says that it was all hardwood. So the softwood we have nowadays may not have been around at that time, because she mentions it was all hard wood. Julie.
On the hardwood, there are pines that are hardwood. The eastern, can't remember, it's a yellow pine. It's considered a hardwood. It's a beautiful wood. The other thing is, Ellen White said that at the end of time, she saw whole cities that were empty here in the United States, whole cities. And that with what's happening now, you can see why. There's so much violence and anger and hatred, murder.
Well, there's also something else, and we are in a country that is going down the tube. And we hurt ourselves by outsourcing stuff going out of the country. And this isn't going off track, this is right along with this of what's happening. Thinking that we can maybe help out other countries, but we have hurt our own selves. There is such a shortage right now of commodities, and it's getting worse. Material for building is really at a shortage. You can't hardly even find electrical panels. It's hard to find now. My plumbers have told me that they're stocking up, and electricians are stocking up. It says the suppliers are telling them there's a huge shortage of fittings and piping because a lot of it was outsourced. And the tariffs are so high that's causing everything to go skyrocket. There's been over a 300% increase in cost of materials. But, you know, God said, as in the days of Noah, there will be people marrying and acting like nothing's going wrong. And that's what I see. Contractors are busier than they have ever been. And people are just spending money wildly. And borrowing money. I mean, borrowing. I got 60 and 70-year-old people that are borrowing $400,000 and $500,000 to build a house. They're not using their own money. So we live in a time here that we need to be serious because, you know, this lesson is just very important for us. The questions right here in Sabbath's lesson says, what did sin do to God's creation? And Lenita had a comment.
For some time now, I don't remember exactly when this thought first occurred to me, but it seems to me, well, in prophecy, we're told that the United States is going to play a prominent part, right? And we know that the devil is trying to do everything possible to negate or make impossible for those prophecies to be fulfilled. It occurred to me some months ago that what is happening in our country is a result of the devil trying to make the fulfillment of the prophecies of Revelation for the United States an impossibility. But God's will goes forward. We don't know how it's going to end, but we know that it will end. We don't know the details, but we know the result. And we can have faith and trust in God that He, even though we do see everything around us disintegrating, perhaps more than any other place in the world, any other country in the world, He is still with us, and He will bring to pass His word.
Yep, He will. We also have to remember that it does say in the Bible that He will present Himself as an angel of light. But before He presents Himself as an angel of light, so people will believe that He is the angel of light, which is representing Christ on earth, He will cause the mass destruction, which He's causing right now. He is causing total turmoil, which He is causing, and then He will present Himself as angel of light, as the Savior, to say, hey, let's do this and make everything look prosperous because of Him. It's all about Him. Satan is trying to set up his kingdom. And it was really interesting. I read in the extra reading. And the extra reading, it says that at the time of the flood, that Satan was worried that his time was up. I've read that before, but all of a sudden it hit that he was concerned that his time was up. That he feared for his life. Yeah, he feared for his life. Yeah, and I know I'd read it before, but I was like, you know, when I read that, I was like, wow, it was in Story of Redemption. You can go back and read it, building the ark, but I was maybe Patriarchs and Prophets after the flood. But anyways, Ellen White says that he feared that he was done, and that's how bad it was, you know. So, anyways, some questions here. What did sin do to God's creation? What did sin do to God's creation? We already mentioned a couple things. Yeah. Because we know when it is restored, the lions will eat grass, will lay down with the lamb. So before creation, everything was working together, right? It wasn't work in chaos like it is now. I mean, it's like all the creation life, the animals, the beasts, they're on survival mode. You know, I've got a very good friend that's lived in Africa for years in Kenya. He sent a picture this week, and him driving home or back in through the Maasai jungle area, and a big lion, big male lion was coming across. He stopped and waited for it and went across the road. But, you know, he said, just on my way home, and, you know, he has to stop and wait for that and make sure that it's not going to attack. But, you know, before creation, he probably would have gone out and, you know, petted it or whatever. But you're not going to get out and pet it now because he loses his life. Lenita and Neva.
I was just shocked last night. I was watching the news, and there was a segment that I immediately thought of this lesson and of what Ellen White tells us in Patriarchs and Prophets about the time just before the flood. The science has just recently, I mean, this came out last night. It was the first time I'd heard anything about it. They have combined the DNA of a monkey with that of a human. They have amalgamated man and beast. It just sent chills down my back. I know this is not the first time probably, but just to have it so blatantly broadcast, we can do this now. It was shocking to me.
Well, I just have to add a positive note because, you know, as we're looking at all the bad things that are happening to the world and how what sin has done to God's creation, God has preserved. And that's, you know, I guess that's what this covenant is all about, that the rainbow, you know, so after the flood, it's just ruined, but there's the rainbow. And what is more beautiful than that? And then I remember Leroy Holmes saying to me one time, I think that a rose has to be preserved perfect. There's nothing that could be more perfect than a rose. So that we'll just see what God has for us in store. Well, you know, there's the thorns, but God made the roses. I mean, all around us we can find beauty and promise. On the way here, there was Lake Roosevelt. It was just serene. It was beautiful, and the mountains and the snow on it. And the snow is even a symbol of God's love, you know, how he can make beauty out of sin. So we can be thankful.
Well, and I think of when I heard them talking about the rainbow in the lesson, it was almost surprising that they didn't mention how it was so perverted. That they've used the good symbol of the rainbow for gay.
Gay pride. Yep.
They'll just take it and twist it and make
Satan.
it.
We could see Satan distorting God's every act that God does. Satan wants to distort it and change things because it says that he's trying to, you know, he wants his kingdom up here. He wants to, you know, he grabbed a hold of the Catholic Church and did the same thing, you know. It distorted people's minds to change the way they're thinking. And you know, God was a symbol of baptism, submersion. We know, you know, and you just look at everything. What God did, Satan tries to imitate and distort. But just like Neva was saying, there's so much beauty in what God has given in spite of sin. Not even the rose. There's some other fabulous flowers, the orchids and the lilies and even the wildflowers. They're just so, right now you see it coming up the yellow in the fields and things like that. It's just, you know, it's just God thought of us in spite of sin, saying, I'm going to give them multiple colors and give them everything so they can see my handiwork. Yeah. Cheryl?
Well, I want to mention the flowers up in front, too. They're beautiful behind you, yeah. And up in the baptistry, they've changed that, too. God's beautiful creation. But what I called the mic over here for was to talk about the elk. We saw 19 elk cross right in front of our car as we drove up our mountain
Amen.
road.
Amen.
We waited. We had to stop and wait for them to
Aren't
cross.
they a beautiful animal?
Yeah. And
It's too bad sin has caused them to be afraid of humans, and you know. But won't it be neat when we're in heaven? We can go right up and put our arms around the elk, or lay down with it, put our head on its belly.
About 40 of them spent the whole day at our place yesterday, and then they were back this morning. The dog was out barking at them, and they were just looking at him like, just go away, you know.
You know, what were some of the characteristics of Noah that God saw? You know, it's brought out in the lesson, well, actually the memory text. It said in verse 8 of chapter 6 of Genesis, it says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Found grace. God was gracious with Noah. And then it says, in the verse 9, it says at the end, it says, and Noah walked with God. But was Noah perfect? No. We know after the flood that, you know, sometimes we want to put these up here and say, these people up here, and some of us say, well, how can God reach me? You know, these people were Elijah and them were all this, and God showed them vision and worked with them. But no, were they perfect? None of them. Noah took a wine, got drunk, and, you know, and one of his sons had a way with him. I mean, you know, so Noah was not perfect, but God used him because Noah wanted to do right. God found grace. Noah found grace in the eyes of God, and Noah walked with God. Noah walked with God. So, did he stumble? Yes, he stumbled. Do we stumble? Yes, we stumble. But God will find grace, you know, that we will find grace in the eyes of the Lord. We can find grace in the eyes of the Lord, and God can use each of us in a mighty way. Noah had faith. God asked him to do something, and when God asks us to do something, we need to have faith and believe that God's word will work. And then we say, oh, no, I can't do that. You know, I don't want to leave my house. I don't want to leave my stuff, you know. Did Noah ever say that? Did Elijah say that? Did Elisha? Look at Elisha. Elisha was in a wealthy, wealthy family. And he left everything, you know. Moses, he left. He could have been, he was in Pharaoh, in the, you know, trained in art and war and language, and he left to go work with some sheep, and then God used him in a mighty way to move over 1 million people across the country. And I mean, what are the thankless job Moses had. A thankless job. I mean, the people were just constantly bickering and fighting and jealous of him and thinking that he was favoring Aaron and his and Miriam because he put them up because God asked him to put. I mean, you think about that. God asked Moses to put Aaron as the high priest. That's my brother. What are the people going to think? So, God asks us certain things to help with our growth and to help us grow with him. I mean,